I am just delighted to be here, but I want you to join me in giving it up for Evelyn Santiago. Woo! I'm a little overwhelmed, so you have to hang with me. I'm a grandmother, so it takes some doing. But I come here and I bring with me a shawl. It's a shawl that I got in one of my very first trips to India, when I came into the region for the very first time. And I kept this shawl with me throughout COVID. And I would put it on when I was cold, and there were many, many days when we were cold despite the heat. And I thought of all of you and all of the early childhood people around the world who were supporting children and families. So I bring the shawl back to the region. I'm here to really congratulate all of you, and particularly the Asia Pacific Regional Network. I was there in 2007 when they were doing the policy review and when ARNEC was launched. So look at how far they've come. Once again, I want to thank all the ministers that are here, especially the people from the ministries, and I know how hard your job is, and we honor you, and the Malaysia Council. So again, help me thank them. I'm going to talk about three things. I'm going to do this talk in three parts. So I want you to know where I'm going with it. First, I want to do some reflections. When you're my age, you do a lot of reflecting. Then I want to talk a little bit about resilience, although you'll hear more about resilience from Frances Aboud when she does her keynote. And then I'm going to leave you with 7 things that I think are emerging in the field. But I want to start by telling you that I think keynotes are developmentally inappropriate because I can't talk to you. I can't feel what you're thinking. So bear with me and excuse me for having to be at the front of the room when I know many of you could be at the front of the room. I want to start my reflections by asking why we're reflecting. It's important for us to reflect on our history because our history grounds us. And the field of early childhood has a history, and we need to pass that history on. We have to reflect on our vision for children and families because it guides us. And we have to reflect on our experiences because they provide us the lessons along the way. So I'm going to start with, why are we here? I want you to ask yourself, what are you doing here? What is your goal for coming to this conference? Is it to learn, to share, to connect, to re-energize, to reflect, to renew yourself? So everybody has a reason for being here. But I think it's really important at the beginning of a conference for you to reflect on why you're here and make a commitment to take something home. One idea, take it home, spread the word. So I want you to renew that sense of commitment while you're here. I also think we have to start by picturing a child, any child. It could be you when you were young. It could be your own children or your grandchildren. It could be a child that you're teaching in your classrooms. Can you see that child? How does that child make you feel? What does this child represent to you? It's children that we should keep in front of us. You know, I know the whole field says ECD. I try never to say those 3 letters. I try to talk about children. Children are what we're about, young children and families. ECD doesn't mean things to people, so it doesn't communicate. We have to talk about young children. I was trying to figure out what picture should I bring here of a child. This was the last child I saw in a program. It was a nature program in my own community. And this little boy was so intensely involved in watering the plants, just like we saw this morning, that I could hardly get his attention. That's progress, because he was persistently focused on what he was doing. The other picture I bring to you is from my own garden. every year in the middle of all these white flowers comes up a patch of red. And those red flowers remind me of children that have special needs and the potential of all of the children, including those children that are special. And we can't forget them as we begin our journey through the conference. Today, 300 to 400,000 children will be born around the world. That means 300 mothers are laboring away. So we need to think of them, particularly if it's hot, because it's very difficult. We also want you to think about a family. Any family. Who are they? What do they mean to you, this family? What do they need to be successful? You know, we've come a long way in parenting programs, right? But do we ask parents what they want? Do we ask parents what we need? Or do we assume that we have a program that's going to fit them? It's time for us to ask parents. I had a friend who had an early childhood program, and he was saying to me, none of the parents are not coming. They're not coming to the meetings. And I said to him, did you ask them why? Did you ask them how you could redesign the program so that it would be more relevant to them? These are the kinds of things that we have to think about. We have to think back on our early days on the journey in early childhood. How many of you have been in the field for more than 20 years? Okay, let's give them a hand. They've hung in there. How many of you are first conference attendees? First conference. Okay, they're the future. We're handing the mic to them. Why did you choose to dedicate your life to young children? When did you start? What have you learned along the way? I never share this, but I thought I'd bring it. This is my classroom. 1972. So these children are 55. And I certainly don't look like that anymore. Oh, those days, right? And I think about those children because they were so full of potential. You're probably asking, what are they doing? So we were trying to promote high expectations for their future. So they were dressed up like doctors. Not that everybody should be a doctor, teacher, all of those professions are important, but I had high expectations. These children were from some of the poorest neighborhoods in the community that I was living in the time. They were so smart. They were so full of potential. So you can't assume just because somebody has a label that says they're poor, that they're not going to grow and be full of potential. So I never share that picture. I remember their names, I remember their spirit. I hope and pray that they're being successful today and that they're parents and grandparents. We have to reflect on the advances of the science. And I always start with 3 slides, and they're slides that those of you who have been in the room, in the field for 20 years know very well. But I think it's always good to remind ourselves of how far we've come in advancing the field. If you remember, there were 3 important developmental concepts that have been guiding the field for decades. The first one is the domains of development are integrated. So social, emotional, cognitive, we all know that, right? That's the reason we have to collaborate. Collaboration is not the goal. They are the goal, and the integration of their domains are the goal. And so the education minister has to talk to the health minister, and the health minister has to talk to the education minister. Why? Not because we're telling them to do that, not because we're creating an ecosystem, which I'll talk about, but because the domains of development are integrated. That's the lesson over the years. At the same time, the second principle that I always share is that the ecology of human development. I started the field, I remember meeting Yuri Brofenbrenner. He had a big impact on my life. And what did he tell us? That children grow up in families, families in communities, and communities were impacted by the policies in the country and the global level. I've been now talking about the new ecology. because I think community and the role of communities has increased as the extended family changes. Community becomes more important, and I'll come back to that, but that's the second principle that I always share. Third is that one developmental domain affects the other, right? So of course we've got to talk about continuity, and I'm a little worried at the end of my career in the field that we have all the focus on the middle of this continuum, and the minister said it, right? And we don't have enough focus on pregnancy to age 3 and the early primary grades. So we do all this wonderful promoting play in the preschool years, and then they go into schools where they sit for hours and hours. We have to focus on changing the developmental trajectory so that the early primary grades are full of play, because that's how young children learn, not just in preschool, but in the early primary grades, and we could do a whole session on that. So I want to just reflect finally on the state of the field, because in the 60s and 70s when I started, a lot of community-based programs were emerging. We didn't make up early childhood, it was made up in communities. And then in 1982, UNICEF launched the Child Survival Campaign because we had a high percentage of children dying before their 5th birthday. We still do, but we've cut it in half. That's a success. UNICEF used to talk about GOBI. Remember this, Shelton? It was global growth monitoring, oral rehydration, breastfeeding, and immunization. That's what the campaign back in 1982 was all about. We're still working on those things. But fortunately, we know that we're also very concerned with those who survive. This is a book by Robert Meyer, who really is the godfather of the field. And he wrote this book in 1992, it was published in 1992. It was called The 12 Who Survive. So he was focusing on the children who didn't die, who survived. And that's our role now, right? Our role is to focus, of course, to continue to reduce child mortality before 5, but to also focus on those children that we need to help thrive. And what's been great is that we've had movement. We've had the Convention on the Rights of the Child. We've had, in this very region, the commitment happened that learning begins at birth. Learning begins at birth. Soak it in, folks. That's a major breakthrough in the way people were thinking. There was a lot more advancement. These are littles, I'm sorry about this, but if you look at the 2000s, we've made a lot of progress. We had the Dakar framework. We had the Sustainable Development Goals, which cannot be achieved without us. They cannot be achieved without us. We had the Nurturing Care framework, but in this region, you had calls to action, the Pacifica call to action. Congratulations, the Hanoi call to action, the Lancet, and I want to thank every researcher that's here today in helping us document child development, and the Tashkent Declaration. These are important documents, but they don't do any good if they're sitting on your shelf and you're not sharing them with people. So I urge us to do that. I think the area that we need the most focus on, of course, is investment. The minister said it, or someone said it earlier, that at least we need, the Tashkent Agreement said at least 10% of education funding should go to early childhood. We're not there anywhere around the world, really. And that early childhood has to be part of the Sustainable Development Goals. I'd also add it's not just education funding. If you look at climate funding, climate-related funding, we should be getting climate funding for early childhood because we're part of the solution. Yet only about 2% of funding over the course of the years has been going to child-sensitive policies. So we've got a global movement now, and I want to recognize the regional networks, and I'd like them to stand up. the International Step-by-Step Association of Europe, and the national groups that bring them, the Africa Early Childhood Network, the Asia Pacific Regional Network, the Arab Network for Early Childhood, yes, Ghassan, and the newest network, Somos Crianza, from Latin America, Carolina. I am so happy. I have never seen them all together. So I don't know what you did, Evelyn and Julia, but you did something to get everybody here. I think Carolina said something the other day, and I asked her if I could quote her. She said, "We have to hold public officials accountable." That is what civil society has to do. When I was in the ministry, the department, I had a very special role because I said I wouldn't go back unless I could have education and health together, liaison. And I used to say to the advocates, put pressure on me, because then I can say, I'm getting a lot of pressure, right? I got one phone call. I'm getting a lot of pressure. We have to do something about this early childhood. So the regional networks, and I'm delighted that the global network, ECDAN, is here, and they'll be launching their strategy. So thank you for all the movement that is happening. It fills my heart. So those are my reflections, and I'm sure you have a lot more. Just a few words about resilience. Haven't we heard that word at least 10 times already this morning? And I have to tell you that my first reaction is mixed about this word. I know we're trying to build resilience in children, and it's important, but they have a right to an environmentally friendly world. They have a right to a world without conflict. We have to build their resiliency, but that's not the answer. The answer is to change climate change. The answer is to stop war. The answer is to end intergenerational poverty. We can't just put it on the children. But it is an important, yes. But I thought about the word, like, what does it mean to me? I mean, a lot of people said, well, I ask people, what does it mean to you? And they said it means that you can bounce back. And I'm not sure it's bouncing back. I think it's bouncing forward, because you adapt to whatever you're facing. And that's part of resiliency. I ask myself, am I resilient? Well, not always. When I'm hungry, I'm not very resilient. When I'm tired, I'm not very resilient. When I don't have my family and friends around me, I'm not very resilient. What does that tell us? It depends on how long I've had adversity. If I've been part of a refugee camp for most of my life, it's much harder to be resilient. So what comes before matters. The current conditions of children matter. It's not, resiliency is not an individual characteristic. It's influenced by the conditions and experiences of a child's life. And we have to remember that. So why are we even talking about resilience? You've heard it over and over this morning. Poverty, lingering impact of COVID, conflict, environmental changes. And again, I'll just put the figures up there. We know that we've made progress. We've cut child mortality in half. We still have 250 million children and growing in poverty, 100 million people displaced, more than 100 million, 1 in 6 living in conflict. And we're not talking about just interpersonal conflict. We're talking about bombs, right? We're talking about devastation in the lives that it will take a generation to get over. And so we're talking about the high risk of climate change. And so all of these things, if you haven't used these two charts, these two pictures, I want you to download them and share them everywhere. This is UNICEF's risk index in one picture, in one graph. It tells us what the impact of climate change is. And look at the region, and the Africa region, and the threats to child development, when we know babies can't regulate themselves. We know they breathe more, and they breathe deeper. And so all of these affects child development. She's giving you water. So, there's so many facts for us to learn. You don't have to learn many ones. I take this chart from Save the Children everywhere. And it's the one that says, for children born today, they're 6 times likelier to grow up in heat and in serious climate emergencies. And it's not just climate, and I want to reinforce this. It's environmental degradation. It's pollution through plastic. It's lead. If you haven't read the most recent report by Pure Earth about the devastating impacts of lead because of things like recycled batteries, all the things that we know are affecting the earth and poisoning the earth, we have to be at the vanguard of environmental justice. Climate is making that worse, but it's environmental justice that we need to begin to talk about. So I think that ARNEC, when they did from the most vulnerable to the most valuable, when they did that report, they framed it exactly right. That the developing child is at high risk of environmental devastation, but we're also the answer, or one of the answers, that early childhood can be the pathway to a new generation. So just for one more minute on resilience, how do we help children become more resilient? Remember, our goal in early childhood is to reduce the risk factors where we can, and to put the pressure on the policymakers so they reduce the risk factors, and increase the protective factors. Early childhood is a protective factor. And the fact that less than half the children around the world, and many less children in poverty, have that protective factor is really the gap that we have to fill. We build resiliency in children by nurturing care. I think in all my years in the field, the development of the nurturing care framework was an amazing accomplishment. And everyone that has put this together really deserves a lot of credit. Because finally, when people ask us, what are you talking about? What do you need? We can put this up there and say, this is what we're after. Because the domains of development are integrated. So we have to have health, nutrition, mental health, early learning, and safety and security. It was a big step. But one of my favorite stories was from the Aga Khan Foundation working in northern India, where they asked parents, how do we promote this in a community? They asked parents, what can we do to promote health, nutrition, and all the components? And their answers were not always the answers that we thought, right? And so I really ask you to ask parents what they think about this framework and what are their ideas for accomplishing it. I think when I think about what children need and what we can do, we have to assure that every child has at least one stable person in their lives. We have to make them feel safe. Routines. Maria Montessori used to talk about routines. Why are routines so important? Because they give you a sense of safety. You know what to expect. I remember an early picture from the Ukraine crisis. And the families were coming into the tunnels, the subway tunnels, because it was the only place that they could be safe. And the children were playing, and the parents were reading them stories. And I thought, that's what they need. They need to feel some sense of familiarity in the world of chaos. So we have to make them feel safe. We have to support their culture and their languages and their home languages. We know they have to bring them into the mainstream, but not without respecting their culture and their languages. And we could do a whole session on that. And we have to encourage play and early childhood services. But I want to focus for a second, and that's all I have, is on the skills that we're talking about. Because some people frame the skills that we're trying to promote in early childhood in academic terms, literacy, math, the traditional academic terms, right? And they're important. Other people talk about cognitive development, social emotional development, physical development. I like to frame what we're trying to do to children in what I call, and many other people call, foundational skills, which help you later on achieve those academic outcomes and are integrated in the domains, and that is curiosity. Show me a curious child and I'll show you a child who's going to be successful. Curiosity, persistence, the ability not to give up, right? And in early childhood, we know all about that because it's easy to feel like we should be giving up. Self-regulation, how do I regulate my emotions? Self-confidence, how do I feel good about myself? Empathy, if the world is missing anything, it's empathy, a feeling that your neighbor and yourself, your souls are the same. You're connected to each other. And problem solving. Children of tomorrow are going to be faced with problems that we can't even imagine now. So we have to improve their problem solving skills. And I think for parents, we have to think about the nurturing care framework, but the one part, and I was part of the Lancet and the development of the nurturing care framework, one of the things I've worried about is that we assume, especially in many of our parenting programs, that if we fill parents up with knowledge, that will be the answer to their own well-being. And it's not. They need emotional support. They need economic support to be able to provide nurturing care. This is from some of the research that I've personally been involved in. We were surveying 1,000 parents a week, 1,000 parents with young children, and what we were finding is something that your grandmother could have told you. You didn't need me to document this. That we were seeing when the financial hardship was at its worst in the middle of COVID was when we saw caregiver stress at the highest and where we saw children's distress at the highest. So we talked about the chain of hardship. When we got public policies that put some economic supports in, the picture changed. Now, can we say that's causal? Probably not. But there is clearly an association. And there's been hundreds of studies done around the world during COVID that found the same place. So we have to help families become resilient. We have to promote social connections. And that's why, we have a lot of home visiting programs in the field. I think we need group programs. They need to meet each other, right? Because they provide more support than we can provide individually. We have to provide them a sense of hope for a better future. We have to recognize they need extra supports in times of crisis. We have to work on shelter and housing because housing affects well-being. And be non-judgmental. Be non-judgmental. You can't say, oh, that parent should be doing this. It doesn't make you feel good when somebody does that. So we have to be non-judgmental. So that is my few remarks about resilience. Let me move on to my last section, and that is 7 trends. And I use the term rowing forward because this region is full of water, sometimes too much water. And but I think it's an analogy to where I want the field to go with some intention towards sustainability. And the first thing I had to start with is assuring that children are at the heart of climate change. Somebody said to me, well, climate change and children, they kind of don't go together. Well, of course they do. Of course they do. It's their future that we're talking about. It's their future. I went to the same classroom on Earth Day, and they sang Happy Birthday to Earth on that day. This is what they were doing. This was their outside classroom. They spend 2 or 3 hours outside every day. The face of climate change is not a polar bear on a melting ice cap. The face of climate change is a child, and we have to make that connection. We have to build awareness, and after I wrote this, build awareness, people know there's something happening. It's hot. It's flooding. I mean, this is a mudslide in Nepal, and they're documenting that in Nepal, and I know our colleagues are involved in that. And this is a picture of flooding in Somalia. We don't have to build awareness. People are feeling it. We have to make the connection between what they're feeling and the impact on children. That's our job. And so when I say build awareness, it's awareness about the connection. And it's difficult to talk about all the disasters, the polycrisis, climate, COVID. We were hoping to get rid of that word, COVID, right? Like, put that behind us. But if we talk about the stories of hope, put a face on it, and make sure people see that early childhood is a priority, I think will make a big difference. And secondly, we've got a green early childhood education. UNESCO has a whole movement, the Greening Education Partnership. I think we have to green early education. So people are saying to themselves, what is that dirty glass in this picture? It's an avocado, right? It's a simple thing. And it was, in a classroom where you don't have any green around you, you can at least grow something. Grow a sweet potato, grow an avocado. When children see that root coming out, they get really excited. That's what this is all about, right? So we have to green curriculum, green teacher training, make eco-friendly facilities. All around the world, I see plastic playgrounds. We want natural playgrounds. And if any of you make playgrounds, I hope you'll hear that. And I really want to make sure that we emphasize climate change is not a subject. We're not teaching young children about climate change. We're teaching them to care for the earth. It's not a subject. It might be a subject in high school, but for us, for young children, it means something different. And I think we need to get that through. I'm very excited about BRAC's, Green Labs and the wonderful work that Save the Children's doing to give you an approach to all of these topics. And finally, I think we have to partner. We have to partner and have a plan. In every emergency that I've ever seen, the early childhood programs are used when there is an emergency. You build a hospital in an emergency situation, and you often see it in the early childhood program. And so we have an important role. We've got to partner with youth, and congratulations to the youth group yesterday. They were awesome in raising their voice. Partner with parents in groups like Our Kids Climate and Mom Warrior Moms, and all the other environmental justice organizations. So let me move on, because I know my time is going, to my second takeaway, and that is that we've got to build whole family approaches. We've got to build multi-generational, dual-generational approaches. My favorite programs are where you put elders together with young children. So we've got elder care and child care in the same location. Because there's something beautiful for the elders when children are around. And what do I mean by two-generation, dual generation? I don't really care what you call it. It means that we're bringing a child focus and a parent well-being focus together in the same family. Not every program has to do this by themselves, but we have to be intentional in addressing those needs. So the core components are early childhood education, but social connections, health and well-being of the parent, economic supports, and post-secondary secondary education and post-secondary. I worry about all the teen parents around the world that can't go back to high school. Oh my goodness, we're stopping them. We're stopping them. We have to make sure that they can continue their education, and that's part of two-generational programs. I want to say just few words about child care, and these terms drive me crazy. Child care and education are not different. We might have a different sign on the top of the room, but to a child, they're learning whether You're calling it childcare, or you're calling it preschool, or you're calling it early childhood. Depends on the quality of the program, not the label. But if COVID has done anything, it's to tear the blinders off the need for childcare. The World Bank says there are 350 million children under age 5 that need childcare. And we have wonderful models in this region. Mobile Creche, One Sky, BRAC, IAC, Little Ripples in Chad. We have wonderful models, and hats off to those of you from Vietnam who are moving forward to support in-home care. Really, hats off. We have a lot to learn from you. So we've got to focus on childcare for working parents. If you create 2-hour programs for preschool, it doesn't fit the needs of working parents. So we have to think about both, because we're about 2 generational programs. But we can't leave out the men. And I was really, my hats off to the regions for talking about fatherhood, male involvement, call it what you can. This is my son-in-law. The day my grandson was born. You know, look at him, look at him. I captured that moment. It was pure love. It was pure love from that moment. And I think it's really important, if we want to keep fathers involved, get them there when the baby's born. Because they look at that baby and they see themselves and they get hooked. So get them in the room. Parent involvement is not mother involvement, right? It's father and grandfather involvement. So 2 generational programs have to address that. My third point is to listen to communities. You know, in the development assistance world, we've brought all this money in and our models that we want to scale. We spend endless time talking about scaling. But we don't focus enough on what the community can do by itself with its own resources, and hopefully with the support of the national government. I think this is a graph from UNICEF Uganda, and it shows all the services that are connected in a community. That's what an ecosystem looks like on the ground. We may say it's an ecosystem, which is multiple systems, is the connection between the health and nutrition, mental health system, the family support system, the early care and education system, and the neighborhood conditions. So housing, safety. When I ask families in my community what they need, they want crime reduced, right? Because that's what's interfering with their parenting. So the governing structure to bring those pieces together is critical. But at the community level, we need to be doing the same thing. We need some coordinated governance. We need common goals. We need a process for taking input from parents and providers. We need actionable data. So we've got a lot of data in the field. We've got a lot of research findings. And my favorite story is we did a big evaluation of one of our national programs. And the evaluators came in to see me. The findings were not good, I'm warning you. And I said, tell me what I have to do Monday morning to make the program better. And they said, well, the research doesn't tell you that. And I wanted to say, go. If you can't tell me what is the implementation that I need to do to make the program better, why do the research? Not for the funders, not to just show impact, and not to describe why you're getting those results. So we have to have actionable data, financing, and of course to support the workforce. I think when you go into a community, when you sit parents down and ask about your goals, they often say, we want healthy births. That's where they start. We want children thriving at 3, and what does that look like? We want curious, healthy, and eager children at school entry. In many countries, they use the word ready. I have mixed feelings about the ready. I think schools should be ready for children and not be forcing our values on that. And they want them successful and well-rounded. during the primary grades. But we also need outcomes for parents. If we're going to have 2 generational programs, we've got to be monitoring outcomes, not just for children, but their parent and caregiver, social, emotional well-being, their health and living conditions. So I'll just move on to my 4th, and that is to support the early childhood workforce. And I heard it a few times this morning. Who is the early childhood workforce? And hats off to Liana and Issa for your work, years and years talking about workforce. Who is the workforce? It's not just teachers. It's teacher assistants. It's coaches. It's mentors. It's home visitors. It's family support workers. It's community health workers. It's home-based caregiver. It's the woman who's caring for 5 children in her neighborhood with no supports and hardly any money, by the way. And so this is our workforce. We have to support every one of these roles. And people who work with children deserve recognition and respect. They deserve adequate compensation. And I can't tell you the number of people that said, well, we can do it cheaper because we don't really have to pay a lot. Yeah, well, you get what you pay for, folks. And it's time for us to be demanding the compensation that our field deserves. We need opportunities for training, healthy working conditions with breaks and time off and retirement. These are odd concepts. And manageable group size. Nobody can do a good job with some of the group sizes that we see around the world. So that's how you support the workforce. 5th, this is my grandson. Here he is. This is when he was going to preschool. And I think of him as the child of the future. My grandson has many cultures in his heritage. He's on his mother's side, he's Italian, he's Jamaican, he's Indian. On his father's side, his ancestors are from Slovakia and from the Philippines. So he is a child of the future, my grandson, and I'm very proud of that. But I can tell you, he's not growing up in the world that my children did. He is so full of technology. Technology is all around him. It scares me, right? How much time he spends on devices. And we talk about it endlessly. I'm sure you talk about it. But we have to talk about it in these meetings, right? We have to put it on the agenda. We have to understand technology. And we have to have a more nuanced conversation. What technology are we talking about? Are we talking about apps? Are we talking about phones or other screens, TV, video, social media, AI? AI is not just letters of the alphabet, right? It's going to have a profound effect on my grandson and everyone else's grandchildren, and it is already on us. So we have to talk about what technology. We have to think through the purpose, not just say it's bad. And believe me, I've been in many restaurants where children are little babies or sat up with their little screens. It takes your breath away. But I recognize that their parents also need a little peace. So it's always mixed, right? We have to talk about what technologies and for what purpose. To promote learning, or to improve health, or to reach parents, or to collect data for assessment. What technology for what purpose? But we have to have some principles. Here are my principles, and I have a lot to learn about technology. Does it bring people together, or does it split them apart? That's one of my principles. I want to know that when I judge whether something is good. Is there a balance between technology and touch? Is that child getting the emotional support that they need as much as the technology? Is there equal access to digital technology? That's an important concept because most of the world does not have access. So that child is not equal to the child that has infinite access to technology. How do we continue to learn about this? And so I ask you, and I'm trying myself, I'm buying books about AI. I'm trying to understand what it all means. We all have to do that. because the children of the future are full of technology, and if we don't understand it, no one will. But I think the most important thing we can do, and certainly the thing that my cohort can do, is to encourage a new generation of leaders. It's time for the next generation, and I want to congratulate Sheldon Schaefer, and please help me thank him. He has mentored so many global leaders, and if you see the intentionality that he reads their projects, that he mentors them, that he coaches them, he is doing what I think we all have to do, which is mentor the next generation. And what I have learned about leadership, and I've learned a lot over the years, is this. It's not about me. It's about we. It comes from the ground up, not from the top down. It's about setting a round table, not sitting at the head of the table. It's about listening and encouraging others. And it's about a vision, but flexibility in that vision. And something that Nelson Mandela, and somebody quoted Nelson Mandela earlier, he said, "Do not judge me by my successes. Judge me by the times that I've failed and I got back up." That is the sign of leadership. A few weeks ago, I had this big meeting with several different states across the United States. And afterwards, I realized I made a lot of mistakes. And I told people how much I grieved over making those mistakes. But I told them on purpose, because they needed to know that I make mistakes too, and that I get up and try to learn from them. And I think that's the important part of leadership. But it also means letting go. This is me. I was in a tribal program, and they put me in a blanket and threw me up in the air to see if I could let go, and feel what it was like not to be in control. That's what it's like, not to be in control. Leadership means giving up the microphone, which I'm going to do in a few minutes, giving it up to the next generation. When we see those birds flying in a V, and the one in the front gets tired, they go to the back and somebody else takes over. That's what leadership is about. So that is almost my last point. Advocacy for young children is a relay race. It's not a sprint. Every generation hands the baton over to the next generation to continue the work, one generation to another. But you can't do that if you don't do the last thing, and that is take care of yourself. So we are full of pressures, right? We have family time, we have work time, we have community time, we have volunteer time, but we're not taking care of ourselves. So nurturing care starts with you. You have to nurture your health. I'm talking to myself. You have to nurture your nutrition, your body, your spiritual connections, your cultural connections. You need time to try new things. You need time to reflect and be by yourself. You need time to forgive people, and feel compassion. His Holiness the Dalai Lama said, world peace begins by developing inner peace. And so during these very difficult times of war, what I've been trying to say to myself, because it's been so devastating, is start with yourself. Who have you been arguing with? Give it up. Learn to love. Learn to be empathetic, because that's where it all starts. So my dear friends, I leave you flowers. These are my favorite flowers from this spring. I hand over the mic. I give you flowers because you inspire me. You are the hope that every child is born with. And I hope that you connect with each other, that you feel re-energized, that you feel connected, and that you have a very productive conference. Thank you.